Hi, I'm Ashley Faus. I am the Director of Integrated Product Marketing at Atlassian.
So I want to start out with asking you if you can describe, I don't know there's probably more than one with Atlassian, but the specific types of problems that Atlassian solves and who you consider to be your ideal customers.
Sure. So we operate across three markets: Agile and DevOps, ITSM, which stands for IT Service Management, and then Work Management, which is more business teams, knowledge workers, finance, marketing, HR. I actually sit in our Agile and DevOps market, so I'm more equipped to speak to who that audience is and kind of the ideal customer profile for us in that market. So we do a lot of marketing to developers, engineering leads, platform engineering teams, product managers, kind of the full software team. And one thing that's a little bit interesting is that we don't just focus specifically on developers. We think about that team holistically, and we recognize that sometimes there's business teams who intersect with that software team. We understand that there are multiple different personas, if we want to use a marketing word for this, in those teams. And so I think it's a little bit interesting because for most of our history, we actually grew in this land and expand or self-serve model, this bottoms-up model where devs were looking to solve a problem or a small team was looking to solve a problem. They throw down a credit card, they can buy kind of a team instance of Jira software, and then it would start to expand from there. What we're seeing now is that as those teams have grown, they need more help with repos. So they need, Bitbucket. They are now starting to expand and think about how do they manage their microservices architecture and how do they understand upstream and downstream dependencies and the health of all of their services. And so we've introduced Compass for them to do that. We also realized, okay, developers also have to interface with other teams like product managers. And so all of that work can't just happen in Jira software. All of the ideation, all of the gathering of feedback, that's really hard to do just in the tickets. And so we launched Jira Product Discovery to help bridge that gap from product managers and that initial ideation and kind of prioritization phase before the work starts in Jira software. So it's been an evolution. And as you can hear, we've got multiple different types of people that we serve across our portfolio.
And just for people who might not be that familiar with Jira or Atlassian, can you just describe what that is exactly and essentially what the job is that's helping them do?
Sure. So it's project management and project collaboration would be the overarching category. And it's to help them, in the Agile and DevOps space, it's to help them ship better software faster.
Would you say then developers are, at least in the group that you're working with and the products that you work with, is it developers that are like building software solutions and apps? Is that essentially the people that you're most focused on?
Yes, I think that would be the easiest one for us to talk about. It's the largest group, right?
Is that something that because you've been there for a few years, right? So you've seen Atlassian really evolve over the last few years. Is that kind of how it's been from the beginning, or is that target audience kind of shifted over time, at least to your knowledge?
We actually started with developer marketing. So or I guess I shouldn't say developer marketing. We started with developers as our target audience. So our founders realized that we actually started, Jira was initially a bug tracking tool. And so they realized that the options on the market at the time were not really sufficient. They didn't like using them. They realized that nobody else really enjoyed using them. And so they decided, hey, we're going to solve this problem. And they created Jira. And then over the last 25 years or so, that market has expanded to include other teams in the software development lifecycle. So we call that the expanded software team. And then obviously we've expanded our portfolio to include the other markets. So developers have always been a core focus for Atlassian, and they continue to be to this day. But we understand that, sometimes engineering team leads or platform teams or DevOps engineers might have a slightly different need than what we initially started with when Jira was first founded and launched 25 years ago.
Wow, goes by real fast. 25 years. That was like the first phase of software, right?
It was Was, yeah, it's super interesting. If you look at the photos of the founders from back in that time, they basically graduated university and decided to found the company. And so they've got, super young faces, and they're just living their best life, figuring out how to solve developer problems that they experience themselves as engineers. So yeah, it's been quite the ride.
And you and I, before we hit record, we were chatting a little bit about the whole concept of ideal customers, right? And ICP, and how the exercise of figuring out your ideal customers can kind of go sideways sometimes, right? Because you can get kind of stuck in the weeds. So before we go on with more specifics about how Atlassian has kind of like overcome, or how you've helped overcome certain marketing challenges, I wanted to give you a chance to share your perspective on what ideal customer even means to you, and how to kind of frame it for people that are listening, that are building their own companies, that could be maybe at the beginning of that, or even if they've been established for a few years and they're trying to really kind of fine tune their approach, that they're working with the people that are the best fit for their particular strengths. So I just want to see if you could share some of your insights on that, or perspectives.
Sure. So it's a little counterintuitive for a marketer to come in and say, oh, you don't need a fancy ICP, right? Everybody thinks that as the marketer, you're supposed to use these big fancy words, and you're supposed to align to all of these big fancy frameworks. And the reality is that for most founders, especially in their early days, they are the customer. They went out and had a problem and looked around and tried to solve it and said, these solutions are subpar. So I think I'm going to build a solution that works for me. And then they go talk to some of their buddies and they're like, hey, have you experienced this? And their buddies are like, yeah. And then they say, well, what are you using to solve it? And their buddies say, nothing, or I hate all the solutions. And they're like, what if? And they pitch their idea. And their buddies who they've worked with, or who they went to school with, or who sit on their current teams, encourage them and say, yes, I would use that thing. You know what else it needs? This feature, or this platform, or this service. And that's how it really starts. And so this idea that you're going to go out and from scratch discover, you're going to sit and you're going to think up this perfect persona and this perfect ideal customer. The reality is that you're probably the ideal customer initially. And then as you grow, I think there's also a misconception that the customers who pay you the most are the ideal customer profile. And what you don't realize is there's another side to that equation, and that's the cost side. How much do those customers cost you to acquire, to retain, and to win over in the first place? Like, if a deal cycle takes years because you're only trying to go after these huge enterprise companies that require a 3 to 6 month RFP, that might not actually be the right deal for you, or that might not actually be the ideal customer profile if you're able to win smaller or more niche players faster and cheaper. And so I think that's the other piece of this. It's not just about the revenue side, it's also about the cost side, because you want to look for the most profitable customers, not just the biggest name or the biggest logo, or even the fastest sales. Sometimes those customers that buy very quickly might be really difficult to maintain and retain. They might have a ton of demands. They might constantly ask for discounts. They might require more of the team's attention. And so when you start getting into those later stages where you do have, I call it product marketing fit, because I come from a product standpoint, but you could call it offering market fit if you sell services or something like that, to really understand that an ideal customer profile has multiple different facets to it.
And I wanted to dive into those facets. So let's definitely go back to that. But, more of it in addition to, the profitability of it, right? But one thing that kind of comes to mind for me, especially with, founders, entrepreneurs, business owners who, they might not have a big team, if at all. And there's more, the costs you think about, it's not just the financial costs of acquiring a customer or maintaining them, it's also the psychological cost, right? It's like the energy to, let's say if somebody's, has more of a service business, right? And they have clients that they have to keep those clients happy. Some clients and customers just take a lot more energy than others. And sometimes that's not because they're wrong. It's just because it's not a good fit with your strengths, right?
It's true. I think One thing that's interesting, so when I worked at Duarte, actually, Nancy Duarte talks about this a lot, this book by John Collins talking about good to great. And he talks about this principle of the hedgehog. And the hedgehog is not very good at very many things, but it is really good at protecting itself because it rolls into a ball and it has spikes. And so it's actually really resistant to predators because it's so good at its one thing, which is protecting itself from predators. So they actually used this strategy during a recession to hone in on their business. And so they actually went from doing all types of different design services. So they did posters and they did websites and they did videos and they did signs. They also did presentations. And what they found is that the work that was coming to them constantly at a higher margin that they actually liked doing and that they were uniquely differentiated in providing was presentations. So they actually cut all the rest of their services and said, we're only going to do presentations. We're going to be the best presentation agency in the market. And so that's what they honed in on. And so they don't do websites, they don't do signage, they don't do books, they don't do posters, they only do presentations. And so because of that, they were actually able to grow and hone in on the right customers, both from a profitability standpoint, from a timing standpoint, and honestly, from a passion standpoint. Like the other piece of this is that you have to be able to attract talent who wants to work on these problems. And so if you try to be everything to everybody, you're going to end up being nothing to nobody. And so I actually think that that story from Duarte was very interesting, where they contracted all of their services down into the one thing that they were great at. And that has driven a lot of their success and growth over the last 30 years.
I love that you mentioned Duarte, and I'm very pleasantly surprised by the turn that can help take in focusing on this ideal customer thing, right? Because that story actually has had a lot of influence on me, right? So her slide out, I think of Slideology, and then Resonate is the other book that
Yep. She's actually written, I think she's up to 6 now.
Wow.
But yeah, Resonate and Slideology were the 2 OG books from her.
I have to catch up on those because those were hugely influential on me. I want to say 15 years ago, right? So as far as, focus and as far as communicating. So if you don't mind, we can dig into that a little more, because that story is something that I've heard before, of course, and it's used as a great example of what can happen when somebody is, a founder, a business owner, right, who is dealing with a pretty commoditized industry, right? Graphic design,
Exactly.
you can easily get caught up in a very commodity kind of approach. And exactly what you said, from my understanding of it, is she realized that not a lot of people, I guess at the time, in general, didn't really like doing presentations, but she did, right? So it was okay, let's drive a bus through this. And I don't know if you just mentioned this or not, but I think she was involved also with the Al Gore movie, Inconvenient Truth. Is that?
Yes.
Remember?
Yep. They helped with Inconvenient Truth. Yep.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna kind of pivot a little bit from Atlassian to the Duarte model, right? Because I think it's something that a lot of people listening can really relate to, right?
Yeah. I'm happy to dig in on Duarte. They've got some really cool stories for sure.
Yeah. So, but before we do that, I wanted to let you have a chance to mention more of the facets. So you said there's a few facets to your ideal customer, one of which being kind of the costs involved, the profitability. Are there any other that just come to mind that you wanted to include in that list?
I think the other big thing is, can you actually solve their problem? So there's, especially when you're first starting and you're kind of grasping at, revenue and profitability, and you're trying to stay alive, you start saying yes to a lot of requests that are maybe not actually in your core offering. And so when you start thinking about matching your ideal customer, you have to think about actually matching them with your ideal offering. And so I actually think this dovetails really nicely with the Duarte story, where they have phenomenal graphic designers on staff, and they have excellent illustrators, they have excellent document designers, right? There is a lot of work that those designers can do. That's not what Duarte is trying to offer. And so they could sell illustration services, or they could sell book designing services, right? Their graphic designers are perfectly capable of doing that work, but they found that that's not what they should be doing. And so I think that's another facet, not just on the looking externally to see who your ideal customers are, but looking internally to say, can we actually solve these people's problem? And can we do it well? Are we uniquely qualified to solve these problems? Because if the answer is no, then you're going to struggle to attract and retain those customers against your competitors. And so that's going to, again, that's going to significantly reduce the cost in terms of time, money, resources, headaches to attract that customer, because you may not be uniquely qualified to actually solve the problem that they've come to you to solve.
And it also makes, when you're like with the Duarte example, and the team can do so many different types of projects, right? And let's say they, Nancy Duarte never came to that conclusion of really niching down and focusing on the strength. The other part of it is, even if every customer they worked with was equally valuable, like they were all long-term, one didn't cost more than the other to service, it creates a just horrific tactical problem of how do you communicate what you do, what we'll call messaging, right? The messaging side of it, in a way that doesn't make you sound exactly like everybody else. Because, if you and I were to spend the next hour Googling graphic designers or design firms and looking at full service firms, I'd imagine we'd see a lot of the same themes coming up and over and over and over again, right?
Oh yeah. And this is, I mean, it's a joke at this point in the tech industry of like, go to any tech website and tell me what the heck they do. And I actually commented on this on LinkedIn recently. I was like, you mean to tell me that my comprehensive single source of truth, single pane of glass, all in one tool and platform isn't helping you? You're telling me you don't know what that is? And literally you look across the entire industry and they all say the same thing, right? And so to your point, getting into the messaging and the value propositions, that match to the ideal customer profiles, you need to speak their language. And nobody is running around saying that, we want a comprehensive tool to drive synergies across the entire business via a single source of truth. Like, that's just so many words that are saying absolutely nothing. So I think that is an excellent call out about niching down not only your ideal customer, but also kind of niching down into your ideal offering. And that gets into the messaging, that gets into the product market fit, which also then influences, like, it's like a nice virtuous cycle between the ICP and then product market fit or messaging. And then obviously the outcome of that would be higher profitability, faster deal cycles, lower retaining costs. Again, I come from a SaaS background, and obviously Duarte does rely on repeat business or retainers or long-term customers. So I've been in the subscription business for a while, and so you do have to keep kind of winning and retaining those customers.
It reminds me, I don't know if you ever watched that Silicon Valley show on HBO from a couple years back, but the first season they were at the pitch off or whatever, and it's like every single presenter for their software was, and we're going to change the world, right? Because we want to change the world. And that was like the big joke, because, 20 years ago, that's what everybody was saying. We're going to change the world. And now, unfortunately they did. I don't know if they did in the way that they were thinking they would, but so yeah, it's that kind of very super high level, like, the way you described it, like, I can't even remember how you described it as a joke because it's so obscure, right? But that's what everybody's seeing when you're not sure about who you serve and what you actually do and why it matters and why it's different and why it's not the exact same generic thing as everybody else. You're stuck with this very like super high level messaging, which, I guess if you're working off relationships and you're getting referrals, maybe it's not that harmful. But even if you get referrals, even if people are sending you business, they're still looking at your website, right? They're still looking at your LinkedIn. They're still looking to see, like, okay, what are these people all about? And not having that clarity in the messaging, nobody's going to spend as much time on this as you are. So there, people that might look are just going to be like right past it, correct?
Exactly. If I can't figure out what you do, then it shouldn't be on the audience to figure out how you can help them. You should make that clear, and then it's on the audience to ask for the help, right? And again, you should make that an easy process for them to be able to ask. But if you're putting all of the onus on the reader to figure out what the heck you do and why you do it and how you do it, that's a big ask for somebody that hasn't agreed to engage in this process.
As we wrap up, can you share any tips for founders and entrepreneurs, small business owners that are trying to figure out how to shift their marketing to attract more of these ideal customers and away from these kind of bad fit types of customers?
Sure. So I think the first thing is to actually sit down and look at all of the deals that you've won or all of the customers that you've won. What resonated with them? What steps did you go through? How long did it take to win them? How profitable are they? And what very specific problems are they solving, or are you solving for them? Especially in the early days, you might find that like, well, we're offering them a platform, and you're like, that's no, but seriously, which features in the platform are they using, or which things are they coming to you for? Again, from if we go back to that Duarte example, if they sit down and they say, okay, of all the requests that we received, presentations make up 50%, and the other 10 things we offer make up 50%, that might be a really good indication that you could double down or triple down or, go all in on presentations. So I would say sit down and answer those questions. Next, once you pull out and you say, okay, these are profitable customers who bought, in what we consider to be a good deal cycle, if it's not an impulse buy, and you see that there's some patterns in terms of the types of things that they're making requests or the types of problems you're solving, then you can go directly to those customers and talk to them and say, what about our approach attracted you to us in the first place? Why did we win over competitors? What did you look at as you were deciding to buy from us to make that decision? And so you can start to get a sense of what their journey is, what channels they're in, what messaging and what words, literally the language that resonates with them. We see this on a larger scale at Atlassian. When we do customer interviews or we ask for feedback, we start to see that there's some patterns in the language that might actually be different than the way we're speaking about it. And so you may even find that there's certain words that do or do not resonate with your audience. And so you can then bring that back into all of your marketing communications and programs. So that's what I would suggest, is to kind of create that baseline, see those patterns. Once you find those patterns from that subset of customers you already have, go actually talk to them and listen to their words verbatim and understand their journey. And then that allows you to start really doubling down to test different tactics, different channels, different asset types, different language. And then you can kind of start honing in on, does that bring you more business? Does it bring the business faster? Does it bring you more profitable customers? And you can adjust from there.